table there. We'd love to hear from you and share your thoughts. Any ideas on how we can improve? Please add those to the bottom. I'm sure you will be reading them. All right, I think we're just about ready to go. Are we just about ready? All right, well then, as we were speaking of technology, we now have our CTO panel, our discussion to hear how competitive carriers are tackling the most critical technical issues and how we're going to find our way into the fourth wave, as Shaitan said. And to lead the discussion is Maggie Reardon. Maggie has been a CNET news reporter since 2004. She covers all the wireless industry, the cell phone services, mergers, citywide Wi-Fi, just about everything in the wireless world, including all those policy issues like net neutrality and hopefully USF and all those good things. So we're pleased to have her back. She's also a busy mom, and we are glad that she's busy today with us. So why don't we welcome Maggie and let her introduce her panelists and guests. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I'll just turn it right over. Maggie.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much, Steve, and thanks for inviting me here. So I'm going to let each of the panelists here introduce themselves. So let's kick it off right to my left here.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Maggie, for having me. My name is Ken Borner. I work for Atlantic Telenetwork. I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Network Operations for our domestic wireless properties. Atlantic Telenetwork is a holding company. It holds many subsidiaries both in the US and internationally, primarily in the wireline and wireless space. Most recently, we are moving into alternative energy and also into cable and video.
Great.
So good to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. Jim?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Lienau, and I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I've been with Cellcom, the wireless company, since 1989, 2 years after they started in 1987. So I've been in wireless a long time, and it's been a wonderful experience and more to be had. Cellcom is also part of a company that's been a landline operation for almost 106 years, coming up pretty soon. We also have CLEC part of the company, as well as other video operations. So I'm here, I'm excited about talking about the 4G technology and things to come.
Okay.
Mark McDiarmid, T-Mobile. So I have responsibility for the radio access network at T-Mobile, spectrum engineering and device technology. At T-Mobile, we're very focused on bringing real competition to the US marketplace, disrupting where we can and leveraging new opportunities. Really pushing the boundary in 4G technology these days and looking forward to doing more of that.
Okay. Neville?
My name's Neville Meijers, and I work for Qualcomm. I head up the small cell program there. Qualcomm, as you know, is the largest fabless semiconductor company in the world. And my focus is on deployment of small cells globally. We're very interested to drive the adoption of broadband wirelessly more globally. And with that, we think that small cells is the way to do it. We've been monitoring the data usage consumption over the last number of years. And every year, data basically doubles. And if it goes on for 10 years, you have 1,000 times more data. And our focus is on making sure that the networks, the wireless networks specifically, can accommodate that data. And we're very, very focused on looking at alternative options for spectrum. So one of my focuses is on LTE unlicensed, LAA, multifier, which is LTE in unlicensed spectrum without a licensed anchor, as well as the 802.11 family of technologies and how they can work with licensed technologies like LTE.
Great. All right. Well, let's get right into some of the questions I have for you all. As we heard, LTE is that's the future right now. I mean, that's what you're going to be building these data networks on. Where are the smaller regional carriers and rural carriers in terms of build out? Is LTE? Are we sort of there yet? Are you guys still building things? I don't know who wants
So
to
Maggie,
answer
I can take that from a ComNet wireless perspective. ComNet is one of the subsidiaries of ATN. We operate in very rural areas in the Four Corner states and Nevada. We have deployed LTE on the Navajo Nation. And keep in mind, the Navajo Nation is, extremely large, very low income, and people have, many people on the nation don't have access to, water or electricity. But we've deployed LTE there. It's taken off tremendously. People are using it beyond what we thought they would use it in terms of their monthly data consumption, and primarily for video, Netflix, YouTube, and some other things. So that's probably about 20% of our network, and we're currently planning on rolling LTE out to the rest of our network. Now, our challenges are, since we're a wholesale roam-only provider primarily, and then we have retail on top of that, we're serving our customers like T-Mobile and others that roam onto our network. And our challenge is to understand which direction they will be headed with their LTE deployments in terms of the bands they're going to support. So our network has to be neutral in terms of supporting LTE for our roaming partners.
Okay, and roaming seems to be still a huge issue, right? I mean, competitive carriers, most of them are not fully nationwide. Even T-Mobile that we have here, a nationwide carrier isn't in every corner of the country and still has to do some roaming. Tell me a little bit about those challenges. I don't know, Mark, if you want to talk about, is that sort of the key challenge to really expanding LTE now?
It's sort of two things to think about there, Maggie. Firstly, at T-Mobile, we've been very focused on expanding our LTE footprint. By the end of this year, we'll be at approximately 300 million covered Americans. But even at that point, there's vast geographic areas throughout the United States, just square mileage, where companies like T-Mobile, our competitors, still are very much dependent on partnerships with common carriers to provide coverage. What we've seen, and Chetan talked about this morning, was a fairly aggressive acceleration of 4G, or I'll call it fourth generation access, in the urban areas of America. And it's crucial that the common carriers, the rural carriers, the partners that we have, find an economic way to get there themselves. And that's just purely from an access perspective. And the second challenge really is making sure that we can have services that run smoothly between urban areas, rural areas, whether it's voice messaging, new forms of rich communications, and things like video calling. And that service layer integration is really where the challenge lies, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And so, you need companies like ATN to be deploying the LTE because they're in the Navajo Nation, like you're saying. Yep. So, I know CCA started a roaming hub a couple of years ago. How's that going? Is that up and running? Is it solving the problem, or is there still some issues there?
It's clearly a very important way forward. We joined the hub, I think, back in June this year. Very excited to see that development, and that should provide an economic way for rural players to integrate in, and for players like T-Mobile to integrate once. In parallel with that, there's no reason why we shouldn't be sharing best practices about how to implement these new technologies and ease the path for implementation, let's say.
Okay. So we've got a big auction coming up. There's been some talk here about that. Explain to me why is 600 so important to the carriers here? I mean, is it important? Because I'll let you guys answer that first, and I'll follow up.
It's very important. So I know there's some thought process out there that there is a lot of spectrum in the rural markets that's not being used, particularly by many of the rural carriers, and I don't disagree with that, but I think it's the wrong spectrum for the rural carriers. What the rural carriers need is low-band spectrum, and that's what 600 is all about. It's low-band. That means it's going to take less cell sites to cover the same distance. It's going to be more cost-effective. Yes, a lot of rural carriers have high frequency, PCS and AWS, but if they really want to be competitive and they want to do it cost effectively and they want to get decent coverage, I think 600 is big for the rural carriers. Now, how they actually achieve that in their process or their goals, that's different. I don't know what the dollars are going to be, but I think 600 is very big for the rural carriers to get.
Right, because, I mean, I guess there are some carriers out there that, might have some 800, 850. Do you think that's sufficient? If you've got 800, 850, you don't necessarily need to bid in this next auction. You can refarm that and use it, or?
No, I disagree, because I think the people that have 800 out there, obviously it's the big 500-pound gorillas that got the most of it. But so there is some smaller carriers, us included, that do have some 850. But to expand beyond our original markets, we usually had to pick up PCS or AWS. So we don't want to be constricted by our original 850 licenses. We need to grow. And to grow, I think we need the low-band 600. Again, I'm not saying it's not going to be a challenge, but I think it's important for rural carriers to get as much as they can. Some have 700, but it's a small amount, I think, compared to what they really need.
Okay. And Neville, I have a question for you on small cells in rural and smaller carriers. I understand how small cells are beneficial when you're in a dense urban area, but a lot of the carriers that belong to CCA are not in dense urban areas. So how does small cells apply to them? Can they use them? And with 600 megahertz, I mean, you can't really apply small cell technology to that spectrum, can you?
So I think if you look at small cells and you look at the 600 megahertz question, 600 megahertz gives you great coverage, but it doesn't actually give you the capacity. So if you really want to offer high-speed data access to rural communities, I think it's a combination of different bands that you're going to have to work with. If you want to reach outlying areas, 600 megahertz is great. But for pockets of higher density, where you want to reach small towns and hamlets and villages, etc., you need small cells. You need to be able to deploy those small cells, leverage as much spectrum as you have in those areas, and then either wirelessly backhaul them, or if there's fiber available, or microwave at that site, backhaul the traffic using that. So it's a combination. At the end of the day, we all want to drive access as much as possible into those areas. It's not just for voice accessibility, but it's also for data. And small cells is the layer that's going to provide that additional data.
So do you feel like you're at a point where you're really out there educating the competitive carriers about small cells? Because, I mean, it seems like, I'm sure there are other people who think like I do, that's like, that's not something that I have to think about as a rural carrier. I'm not in New York City, I'm not in Washington, D.C., I'm not going to think about it. I mean, is it a real education?
It is an education process, and we actually work very closely with the Small Cells Forum. Small Cells Forum have actually put out papers in the past around how small cells can competitively provide rural areas with coverage and capacity. And in fact, in Europe, in the UK today, we're working with a number of partners who are rolling out small cells on a rural basis on top of their macro layers in order to provide that additional capacity.
Okay. Another issue that seems to have popped up a lot here at the show and sort of falls into the small cell idea is LTE-U. First of all, explain to me, what is LTE-U?
So LTE-U, or LTE in unlicensed, is the ability to combine a licensed carrier together with LTE in unlicensed. And the first release of that is aimed at LTE releases 10, 11, and 12. And basically what it does is it takes a licensed anchor, takes supplemental downlink, so it's downlink-only data on the unlicensed carrier, and aggregates it together using normal carrier aggregation. And as a result of that, it's focused on 5 gigahertz, but as a result of that, the aggregation of those two bands gives you much greater capacity, gives the carrier the ability to control a single network, so they don't have to manage a Wi-Fi network as well as an LTE network. It's now aggregated into a single network.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you. It seems like, a lot of carriers for a long time have just used Wi-Fi to roll over, and, why not just keep doing that? Why invest in this other technology?
So the other big advantages that the aggregation gives you is the extra coverage. So the performance is 2 to 5 times that of Wi-Fi. You also get the ability to control quality of service, security, so you can offer the same KPIs that are offered over your license carrier, you can offer using this aggregated methodology with LTU. The first version of LTU is focused on the US, India, China, and Korea. There are other markets that can use that, but the standardization of a second wave of LTE and unlicensed called LAA, License Assisted Access, will happen through 3GPP and Release 13, and that will be more broadly deployed across the globe. And then we're also very focused on, you asked the question about Wi-Fi. So we're also very focused on actually aggregating LTE and Wi-Fi. And in that way, you also get benefit over just using the two networks separately. So there's a 70 or 80% benefit in data throughput of aggregating the two bands. What you don't get, though, is the KPIs and the extra coverage that comes with aggregating LTE in unlicensed spectrum.
Okay. Now, I know there's some controversy here with LTEU, which is probably why I'm hearing a lot about it. And it seems to be that, from what I understand, LTEU is sort of going outside the standards bodies. You've got Qualcomm, Verizon, T-Mobile now, some other companies kind of, figuring it out. And then you've got the LAA situation in working through 3GPP. And Neville or Mark here, I don't know if you want to jump in too. I mean,
we spent good time last night over dinner chatting about this and
yeah.
solving world problems, didn't we?
And actually, you say it's going outside the standards process. Actually, LTU is reliant on the standards release 10, 11, and 12. It's the,
but the fear is that it's not going to play nicely with Wi-Fi.
We're focused on making sure that LTU, whichever variant, coexists with Wi-Fi. And we've done extensive testing together with our partners, T-Mobile and Verizon, and the infrastructure vendors, to ensure that we don't damage Wi-Fi. And in fact, we think that LTE, or we've actually shown that LTE coexists more fairly with Wi-Fi than some Wi-Fi access points coexist with Wi-Fi. And we've had independent verification of that. The Signals Group recently published their own independent study looking at LTEU, the first phase of LTEU, together with Wi-Fi. And in fact, they found that there is no standard performance characteristic between different Wi-Fi access points. Some behave very well together, and others hog the medium and behave very poorly. But LTE in all of those cases actually plays quite fairly with all the Wi-Fi access points.
I'll jump in, and you're quite right. There's definitely a lot of noise about it right now. I think you got to look at the fundamental motivations. I mean, from T-Mobile's perspective, we've been heavily invested in serving customers in unlicensed bands for many, many years, and that's not going to stop just because a new technology emerges. Fundamentally, we want to make sure that these technologies coexist on devices and work well on devices simultaneously. So one of the things that is kind of missed in the discussion is that on typical cell phone devices today, smartphones, routinely the cellular modem, the Bluetooth, the GPS, and the Wi-Fi chips are all communicating simultaneously and performing very well in concert. And that would have to be the case with LTU. So there's no concept of not having coexistence working well. But Neville's point is important because the performance benefits are very significant, very significant. And whether we get that performance from LTU or we get it from enhanced versions of Wi-Fi, as far as the consumer's concerned, it matters a little bit less. What matters is we get the innovation that we need in the unlicensed band to get performance, spectrum efficiency. Chetan's formula about the cost of moving bits around is very sort of clear in my mind. And the reality is that Wi-Fi really hasn't faced a tremendous level of competition in the unlicensed band to date. And competition, we know, stimulates innovation, it stimulates breakthroughs, and it encourages ecosystems to perform and reform. So I think what we're seeing right now is more noise around don't interfere with my business model than a question of don't interfere with my technology.
I was going to say, so you're saying this isn't a matter of the big wireless carriers trying to shut down cable before they even get started in being competitors?
Absolutely.
I can see it now. No.
Yeah, Maggie, I'll give you my opinion on this. I mean, again, from the rural areas that we serve, we're very interested in unlicensed. I mean, anything that can help to bring a better product or service or add more capacity into rural areas is a plus for us.
But capacity isn't really an issue in rural areas, is it?
At times it can be if you're spectrum limited, right?
Okay.
So if we can use unlicensed to augment that, why not? And also, we're in areas where Wi-Fi is not even available, right? We're bringing broadband to some of these communities for the first time, wirelessly. I mean, many of these communities don't even have broadband access, period, end of story. Wi-Fi is not even in the picture. So, to the extent we can use it, and I agree with Mark, we have been using unlicensed spectrum in other applications for other products and services, and we've used this successfully.
I mean, I guess, is this a way, in a sense, like I mentioned before, we've got this auction coming up. I think the real fear here is always the fear in an auction is that T-Mobile, or that, not T-Mobile, Verizon and AT&T are going to walk away with the lion's share of everything. And that leaves the smaller guys with nothing. I guess unlicensed offers this other opportunity to get spectrum for free. You don't have to bid against anybody. You can use what's there.
Well, I mean, the carriers have been using that unlicensed spectrum for many, many years, since the beginning of Wi-Fi. So the business model hasn't really changed. As Mark said, what we're trying to do is really drive innovation to the benefit of the consumer. At the end of the day, with the huge amount of data that is going through the network, increasing every year, doubling almost every year, we got to provide more spectrum, better technology, better devices, innovation around things like carrier aggregation, FECIC, drive innovation in the 802.11 family with 11AX and 11AZ. So innovation is not just happening on the LTE side, it's also happening on the 802.11 family. And the real focus is on making sure that the consumer gets the best possible service and at the best possible price. Today, that cannot be done just where we're standing. We need more spectrum. We need denser deployments of small cells. And if we can leverage unlicensed spectrum to the benefit of the consumer, drive down the cost per bit of consumption and deployment, and leverage maybe some of the licensed spectrum for backhaul so that we can actually get bigger pipes to provide services to consumers in rural areas, then it's a win-win situation for everybody. I think, as Mark said, the argument has gone beyond the technical challenge of coexistence. It's now really a business discussion. And I think everybody, over time, I think everybody will get comfortable that this is not a land grab for unlicensed spectrum. This is really about innovation and driving consumer service.
I just want to add, I think it's another tool in the toolbox. It's a necessity, I think, for long-term growth and control of data, wireless data.
Okay, all right. Let's move on to talking about 5G. Everybody here seems to be talking about 5G. So, first of all, what is 5G? I'm still unclear. Does anybody want to take a stab at explaining what it is?
Well, if you listen to what's going on here the last 3 days, what isn't 5G is probably a better way. I think everybody's heard through the various seminars that have gone on what 5G is. Certainly it's going to improve life, it's going to improve speeds, it's going to improve use cases, it's going to improve a lot of things. So I think from a small carrier standpoint, a CCA, that's what I'm taking the view of right now. It's important that you keep your eye on 5G, where it's going, because we all need to be a part of it. But I just want to say to all of us carriers out there, some who have 4G and some who are trying to get to it, you really need to focus on your core business right now. Keep that engine running, okay? Because if you stop oiling the wheels and things like that. You still have to deploy 4G if you haven't already to even get to 5G. So you have to hear what's going on, but you also have to keep your eyes on what you're doing right now, your core business, devices, and how you get from point A to point B. But keep on listening. Jim's opinion.
If we look at all those intelligence services we heard about in the earlier presentation, we're gonna need a network that goes beyond the 4G network today. High reliability, very, very low latency, greater bandwidths, a network that combines a number of different services, not just data services, that works together. And if we think about some of the backhaul technologies we have today, which run at gigabit speeds wirelessly, we're talking tens of gigabit speeds. We're looking at using higher spectrum bands, the millimeter wave bands and 60 gigahertz bands. All of that is going to combine together to bring about the future of the intelligent network.
But from a consumer perspective, 5G is not about me going out and buying another phone. It's not going to be like this 5G phone necessarily, is it? I mean, this is about adding more capacity to the network, being able to do more of the Internet of Things, correct?
This is about things connecting and happening around you that make your life better, that make services better, that make give us the ability to solve some of the larger challenges that we face in society. Autonomous vehicles, intelligence that can help us reduce health issues.
So it's
security,
not just about speed, which is what we came to know with going from 2G to 3G.
LTE was about more speed. This is, as I say, this is about reliability, lower latency, so that when an autonomous vehicle is moving in the road, it can immediately react to the conditions around it. LTE is not built around that. 5G will be. 5G will bring about a totally different paradigm that enables a new class of service that we haven't seen before.
I think, to add to Neville's comments about this, Chetan did a wonderful job illustrating some of the developments on computing and the computing front. And if you just think of that and the example of high-definition video, it's almost like the human mind we haven't reached the level of fidelity in video, for example, that the human mind can see as being truly like human or visual, So the advent of 4K TVs and now 8K TVs has been discussed. Video clearly is going to be a big part of what comes next. It is already. That exponential curve that was shown earlier is happening right now, and we're all very, very aware of that. So one of the biggest use cases for the next generation of wireless, whether it's evolutions of 4G, which are super important, combinations of unlicensed or this new radio that will enhance and maybe deliver in some of the 5G promise, is just capacity. Capacity to serve huge volumes of video and new forms of traffic from sensors, sensor networks, and some of the connected intelligence that was referred to earlier.
And what I'm hearing here is spectrum is going to be behind all of this, right? I mean, what are you going to do if you don't have enough spectrum? Right, it sounds like you're going to need quite a lot of that to deal with the capacity that you need to go to 5G. So is it, again, going back to the auction, how important is it to have that layer of low band? I mean, that's not high capacity spectrum, but is it still critical as you plan forward to 5G?
It's absolutely critical. And we always think about low band spectrum as just good for coverage. But in actual fact, if you think about where the density of consumption of data actually happens, it's indoors. It's in buildings like this and at our homes. So low band density can actually give you better propagation from indoor out. And if you have this paradigm of trying to leverage fixed broadband into wireless broadband, you can actually leverage that spectrum together with other spectrum to give you better in-to-out coverage. So it's not just about deploying 600 megahertz macros, but it's also about deploying spectrum indoors and making sure that we densify the network indoors where the consumption is actually going to happen.
And I would imagine, again, unlicensed plays into this. I mean, do you see unlicensed being crucial in when we eventually get to 5G?
We see three areas of spectrum. So there's absolutely, we need to open as many licensed bands as possible. That guarantees the highest quality of service that we can give consumers. And we need to be able to deliver that if we're going to be able to deliver time-sensitive data services like autonomous vehicles. We also need to make sure that spectrum that is not being used all the time across all geographies, across the entire band that's being licensed, is given an opportunity to be used by others. So if you look at the 3.5 spectrum here in the United States that is allocated to the Navy, the FCC has basically put in place the ability for other licensees, PAL licensees, or unlicensed users in the GAA band to get access to the spectrum on a secondary or tertiary basis. So that shared licensed access usage of spectrum that already is licensed out there is another way of getting access to more spectrum. And then lastly, unlicensed spectrum. There's a huge amount of unlicensed spectrum that's not being used efficiently today, and that can be opened up in the 4.5 bands, sub-6 gigahertz bands, and then in the millimeter wave and 60 gigahertz bands.
Yeah, and I think Neville's right. I mean, we also need to have harmonized spectrum, geography-wise across the world, so that we can have compatibility and with devices and networks and roaming. I think that'll be extremely important, and finding a large enough swath of spectrum to accommodate that at the low bands is difficult, right? And then you look at the millimeter bands, and I asked myself the question: how applicable is that going to be in rural America? And initially probably not, but who knows over time as these data services take off.
Whatever happened to white spaces? We never hear about that anymore.
Well, I think it's, in many ways it's been enshrined in the idea of shared access. And Neville mentioned the 3.5 gig band. But I want to go back to something a little bit more sort of relevant and near term, and Jim, you were talking about this. The first point of order is to figure out how to use the spectrum that's already in our possession to the highest and best use. And there's sort of two things there that are really key. First being, how do you take the services that, and we were talking about this a couple of days ago, how do you take the services that are running, traditionally on signaling system number 7, and things like messaging and voice and basic telecom services, put them onto IP so that they can be run on much, much more efficient radios like LTE. So there's a win-win here for operators in rural America and ourselves too, to converting to LTE, because it provides a placeholder, a bedrock foundational piece as we consider the step to what comes next, right? And that transformation of IP is really, really key in this. How do you get voice to run on IP? How do you get VoLTE to work well? How do you get rich communication services up? Because once you've got that, you can start to retire some of these legacy services and the legacy radios that are occupying good spectrum, right? And I think it so pains me today to think of all the CDMA that's still out there. At T-Mobile, we turned all our Metro PCS CDMA off about 3 months ago, but yet others are talking about keeping it around for the longer term. The transformation to IP is absolutely key, and if that's not done soon, then that exponential curve, which is going to creep up on everybody, is going to take over, right?
So why doesn't it just happen? What's so hard about voice over LTE?
Well,
from a technical standpoint.
Let me say, I think the LTE radio, the basis part, is actually a lot simpler than many of the technologies we've wrestled with. So that's good news. It's easier to manage coverage and interference. But the VoLTE piece is a little bit tricky. The standardization that was done a few years ago was more like a Lego building set than it was a complete solution. So we're going back now aggressively through GSM-NA. T-Mobile's leading and participating in VIRTUE, which is a work stream designed to really get the best practices for VoLTE implementation down. To Ken's point, to make sure devices work smoothly between networks, and that work stream's moving ahead pretty quickly. I think the CCA and the hub could play a big role in that, enabling VoLTE and interworking of RCS.
Because it seems like the efforts are being led by the big carriers, mostly. I mean, I think that's generally how these things go. But I know, like Verizon has talked a lot about VoLTE. They've rolled it out on some devices. But how should CCA and these smaller carriers get involved?
Well, I think
they?
participation in forums like this is really key. having an active participation in GSM-NA, and I mentioned the VoLTE work stream. That's where the action is right now. And getting started with VoLTE, getting started with devices and implementations, and seeking out solutions for the IMS core which are economically viable and affordable. So there's been a lot of discussion about NFV and if, an SDN, if there's a way that those technologies could be used to provide virtualized cores or to find partnerships where that can be engaged, that's a way of doing it too. But I would say start early and build competence in the workforce to adapt to this new way of working.
And as smaller carriers, as they're building out their LTE networks, what do they need to be thinking about to get VoLTE to work, right? Like, do they need to be doing something different than maybe someone would have thought of a couple years ago?
Yeah, well, link budget would be first, second would be link budget, and third would be link budget. So, the uplink on LTE is a little bit fragile, and if the operator's running in the mid bands, uplink performance is key. So having devices that perform well, having radio networks that have uplink diversity. We implemented 4-way uplink diversity at T-Mobile deliberately. Tower top amplifiers, antenna integrated radios that give it, enhancements to the link budget are really key. And then having a very clean transport architecture, right? Mm-hmm. And I would sort of advocate too that it's very key to choose your vendors very carefully and thoughtfully. And it's not necessarily the best thing to mix and match, but having clear ownership of certain domains is key.
Okay.
A couple thoughts on that, if I may,
yeah, go ahead.
Maggie. So I agree with what's been said. T-Mobile's a little bit bigger company than a lot of us folks in here, so having a prowess within our companies to be able to do the LTE, let me just say the VoLTE, is a challenge for many of them. So first of all, you have to have a solid LTE, basic LTE network before you can even get to VoLTE. And not all the carriers, I don't think, have even gotten to VoLTE yet. I think most of them are close, but some of the challenges that we're just mentioning, finding, if you don't want to put your own core in, which is extremely expensive, and I haven't even talked about IMS, there are companies out there that will host carriers, which I personally think is a good way to go, especially the smaller carriers. But what's very important, and the word was mentioned a couple days ago, skill sets to be able to do this within small carriers is challenging. And a lot of times you may have to fall back on your vendor, which of course does mean more money. So there's these little issues of being able to understand the technology, and number two, being able to execute it. And then obviously if you can't execute it yourself, with some help. So you just get your basic LTE network up. Then you have to lay VoLTE on top of that. And what was just mentioned was uplink, uplink, uplink is very critical. And I'll just say the other 3 words are coverage, coverage, coverage. Because if you have cells, LTE cells that are not overlapping enough, as soon as you go to VoLTE, it's really a critical matter. So I just want to suggest that the modulation schemes that are used for VoLTE are different than other ones, obviously. So if you have a circle of LTE coverage, when you actually lay VoLTE over that, circle shrinks just a little bit, just due to the modulation. It has nothing to do with the performance of the network. That's just the way the technology works. Depending upon how your overlapping cells are, you may have issues at the cell edges because of this slightly reduced size due to the modulation. So knowing that in advance is very critical, and so you have to test when it comes to the VoLTE. So the uplink is very important. The other thing is you have to make sure that your PIM is good. You have to make sure that your SWR is good on. These are all things that have to be good, and they have to stay good. And the only way you know that's going to be taking place is you have to watch your KPIs day in and day out. It's an excellent technology, but it's a very fragile technology. And for people who are just trying to get into it, it's a heck of a challenge.
So it sounds like, again, the low band spectrum is really important.
It helps, but as was said before, we also need the high frequency spectrum for capacity.
Right.
So I'll just say the low band is a transitional type thing, particularly in the rural markets, but it's not the only thing.
Right. So now is there going to be a difference for the GSM-based carriers versus the CDMA carriers in rolling out VoLTE? I mean, one going to have an easier time than the other?
Well, I think I'll comment on that, and I think the challenge with CDMA as a basis is there's zero interworking, so there's no way to provide call continuity between a VoLTE call and that's transitioning between an LTE cell and a cell that only has CDMA. So back to Jim's point about coverage integrity is really, really key. I would differ slightly in the perspective. I think if you set up on the course of trying to design an LTE network with VoLTE in mind first and foremost, and that's how you develop your LTE plan, you'll end up with a great LTE network, period, whether it's for voice data or anything else. On the GSM side, it is a little bit more straightforward in the sense that the standards are defined and solutions are available today to transition all forms of telecom services between LTE and the circuit switch domain and UMTS, and in our case GSM as well. Not saying it's particularly straightforward, it's somewhat complicated, but it's all there effectively. Yeah.
Yeah, and Maggie, I think the way we look at VoLTE is, just looking forward, we don't have it deployed yet, but to the extent it can help to make us more efficient, reduce our costs. One of the greatest challenges that I have, again, and probably more in Jim's camp, is even getting fiber and broadband connectivity to our cell sites to deploy LTE with. In rural America, that can be extremely challenging. And we're working very closely with any partners that we can find out in rural America, in many cases having to deploy our own microwave or even deploy our own fiber to our cell sites just to get that bandwidth in there.
That sounds expensive.
It can be, but at the end of the day, it's and we look at it as maybe another business opportunity for us, because it hasn't been, as we saw this morning, the growth in data, even in large metro areas, we're gonna see the same phenomenon in rural America, right? Once it's delivered, the uptake will be tremendous.
Yeah. Neville, was there anything you wanted? I didn't know if you. No, you're fine.
Yeah, VoLTE has been challenging, as we've seen. There've been some false starts, but I think it's essential to the network, and I think it's going to bring about a number of changes once carriers actually go and launch it and have it end to end. I mean, the fact that you can move to an all IP-based network is extremely important. It's revolutionary. We've seen what it's done on the fixed broadband internet, the types of services and the integration of services that can happen. And there are some Asian carriers who already moved over to an all IP-based network, and the continuity of services between wireless and fixed broadband is huge, and not just for voice and multimedia services, but for gaming and all kinds of other services as well. So it's a huge enabler. Once you have that in the network and it's up and running, all kinds of other things are possible.
Yeah, I would add to that and simply say, the thing that isn't obvious in the front, when you're looking at the VoLTE opportunity, is that it makes interworking with other IP networks very viable and seamless. And we had a discussion earlier about small cells, and the most obvious small cell example today is Wi-Fi in the home. With VoLTE, with Wi-Fi calling, which uses precisely the same core, presents a tremendous opportunity to provide services over IP networks that may be provided by somebody else. In the case of, the typical home in America, it's DSL or cable. Right. And in that case, at T-Mobile, for nearly 10 years now, we've been providing our services OTT. We've been part of the OTT shift that Chetan talked about earlier today, in terms of providing GSM and all the rich services that people enjoy with mobile, but we're doing it over Wi-Fi. And with VoLTE, it was fairly straightforward to integrate and provide seamless handovers between the home and outdoors, just through the IMS core and some of the mobile IP technology that comes with that. So tremendous benefits in terms of how we think about the future. But anybody who's thinking about holding on to what is really the past is really sort of putting a boat anchor down that's going to stop them moving forward. Mm-hmm. But it's going to catch them out soon, I think, because that exponential curve is going to apply to everybody. And getting those boat anchors removed and getting yourself freed up is super important. IP transformation is super.
And as everybody
super key.
moves to IP, the roaming issue is going to become much easier, don't you think, eventually?
I believe so, with
Yeah.
time and effort and focus, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jim's point actually is probably the most important one in this discussion. Beside technology, it's adapting the workforce, training on skills, sharing best practices, engaging, and actually getting your feet into this soon and learning and starting the learning process quickly. But to be honest, the sheer commitment to do that just breeds confidence in the organization from the first place. So getting started early has many benefits.
Yeah.
We're all going to get there. Just a matter of when.
Right,
No
right.
question.
You know, and as we heard earlier, the Internet of Things is coming. That's where there's going to be some big growth. Why is it important? Why is LTE important for that evolution? It seems like a lot of the devices that we're connecting don't maybe necessarily need the fast access of LTE. It could work just as fine on 3G, or it could work on unlicensed. What's important about LTE, and then sort of looking forward to 5G, I guess?
I think just the number of devices that are going to be connected, Maggie, are going to drive that. And I mean, there's as Chetan said, there's been a lot of connected devices out there for many years, but just the pure numbers are going to cause that growth curve to increase tremendously, and the data behind it. Even with those low data use devices, there'll be so many of them that will need that capacity to carry that traffic.
Okay. Neville?
I think the other aspect of IoT is there are certain services where you need that absolute reliability, you need security, you need the KPIs that come with LTE that don't necessarily come with unlicensed spectrum unless you provision all of those aspects with the service. And so LTE actually provides a layer that is very, very dynamic and useful for the Internet of Things. And now that the standards body has agreed a new standard, narrowband IoT, which will be part of Release 13, I think you're going to see again a whole new swath of innovation around IoT and what you can do with LTE. That's not to say that IoT is not going to continue to innovate in the 802.11 family. Absolutely, I think you're going to get this huge mix of different types of services depending on whether it's consumer-focused, industrial, what kind of security you need, mission critical. They're all there's a whole host and range of different services that need to play together. But I think LTE, narrowband LTE in particular, is going to be a very, very important factor in the network going forward.
I mean, I know that there are a lot of carriers who see this as a big growth opportunity for the future. But, as I sort of sit here as a consumer and I think, why, think about my home, for example, why do I need to pay my wireless carrier for all my things connected when I could just use free Wi-Fi and I've got my broadband connection? And as Chetan said, it's still more cost effective to push bits over a wired connection than it is over wireless. So, I mean, in essence, with unlicensed and with more fiber out there, what is the opportunity for carriers to get paid?
I think the opportunity is to manage those services through the cloud. The ability to actually organize and ensure connectivity to the consumer and remove that obstacle from the consumer is huge. I mean, I run a connected home, and I have to deal with outages and adding devices and making sure that devices actually are collected together and work together. And it's a lot of upkeep in order to do that. That can all be removed from the consumer, put into the cloud, and offered as a service. And I think there's opportunities all the way down the line, from the consumer all the way through healthcare, through elderly care, security, etc. All of those types of services can be offered, and they can all be managed remotely, cloud-based, securely. And it's a huge opportunity, I think, that's going to present itself to the carriers.
But I guess the business case has to be figured out, because it's like I don't want to add my refrigerator to my, my 5 gigabyte plan from Verizon.
It doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be part of your data plan. either. It can be a totally different type of service that Verizon offers to you, or T-Mobile, or any of the regional carriers.
Well, there's clearly, and this was very evident in the keynote this morning, a broad range of business cases and models that are going to develop and emerge. The importance of evolving LTE, 4G LTE is key, simply because it's going to provide a basis technology around which we can do so much more in the future. And it may be such that it's maybe cheaper to do it in 2G today. I mean, this is a tension we face in our business. But the right answer, the one that builds a path to the future, is to think about how we do it in LTE, no question.
And also, again, you're not going to have a single device in the home that is just Wi-Fi. You're going to have multiple radios in the device. We look
People
at
already do.
Look at the Google On Hub that was launched a month ago. It's got 11 AC, it's got a Zigbee radio, it's got Bluetooth. You look at Amazon Alexa with all its microphones and speakers and the intelligence that's built into that very low-end processor, because everything's done in the cloud. You can imagine the combination of those two platforms together with LTE and the types of services that then could be offered remotely, all voice-driven or smartphone-driven in the home. And it could be, again, revolutionary in terms of home automation.
Anything that the carriers can do to make it so that I don't have to keep unplugging things and plugging them back in to reset my network and my Wi-Fi and whatever.
Even just, the simple tragedy of having Wi-Fi extenders in the home that don't allow mobility between them is a miss, right? So many people in America have problems with coverage from Wi-Fi. It's unfortunately a little bit lower performance. Its envelope is a little bit less than most homes need.
But I think the problem is it's expensive to use. When I'm thinking about the home, because that's what I'm most familiar with. The way data is priced today, it's not cheap, from a carrier. Whereas Wi-Fi and your broadband, your hardline broadband, is considered cheap.
But I think that paradigm is going to change. There's no reason why, in a home where you control the environment, that a carrier might not zero rate the data that's consumed through the access point in that home. It's quite feasible, and if there are other services that they want to offer that are on top of the standard LTE service, they can do that.
I would agree that pricing model has to change. But in addition to that, the networks have to evolve to support that.
But what's interesting is, from my perspective, the pricing model is actually, there is no unlimited anymore. I don't know, Verizon, for example, just other than T-Mobile and Sprint. But
still very much
we just saw
T-Mobile, yeah.
I think it was yesterday. Verizon is going to sock its unlimited customers.
Well, Verizon's got a problem, right?
They've
got several problems. One, they can't afford to give unlimited to their customers because they may actually use it, right? And they're on a path to eradicating unlimited data, which in my mind is completely diametric from this push into 5G, which is going to require new forms of rate plans, which are much more pro-consumer, right? At T-Mobile, it's our job to remind the marketplace that unlimited's here, right? You can use it. The consumption figures that Chetan showed earlier today are T-Mobile is way off the left side of that curve and far ahead any national average that you're seeing reported, because we're giving consumers the chance to use the service. We're pricing it in a way that's encouraging them to use it, and we're able to do that because we're adopting the very most efficient technologies to access the spectrum. So there's no question that there are ways of being innovative in the pricing models, and if we don't let consumers consume and do what they want to do, they'll simply find other ways of doing it, right? Without question. The home's very, very key. It solves several problems and challenges. It solves the real estate problem for small cells, because the person in the home wants to have great coverage. They want to have ubiquitous service, and they don't want to spend their weekends fixing wireless printing problems, which we all do, right? So, we've got a tremendous opportunity to go and help solve a lot of those issues for consumers and, make their lives a little bit less maintenance-ridden,
Yeah, and the same goes for enterprise and for venues like this. There's a huge opportunity around small cell innovation, around what we would call, a federated or neutral host approach, where small cells can actually be shared internally across unlicensed bands, like they are with Wi-Fi. So bring the sophistication, the reliability, the performance, the mobility of LTE, together with the ease of use and access and neutrality of Wi-Fi. Combine those technology principles together and give consumers much better service indoors, both in the home and in enterprise. And with IP networks, it's possible. It opens up all kinds of doors. Getting into enterprises and venues, et cetera, has been a challenge for, across the world for LTE and for other licensed band technologies.
Yeah.
And
Jim,
we need to make sure that we can address that.
Right. Jim, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. It seemed, are you?
No, I'm on board with what they've said. That basically, if we can get the LTE out there, we're going to get better connectivity. We're going to be able to get more throughput, and obviously, when you can offer the advanced features, that's going to be a good thing for.
I want to touch real quick on devices, and one of the things that I feel encouraged about with the latest iPhone is I think there's 23 bands of LTE packed into that baby, and it's like one SKU. As a consumer, that's exciting because I feel like that means I can take that phone anywhere to some of the regional carriers, rural carriers. It's like Nirvana is almost here, right? But how far can this go? Can we get a phone that can be global? Like, how close are we to getting one phone that can be sold throughout the world?
Well, I'm not being an OEM manufacturer. I think there's a couple of dynamics, Maggie. I think the first one is you have to recognize that there's some tension in how the devices are sort of built and what the bill of materials looks like. And the first tension point is you get very high quality chipsets and silicon going in from providers like Qualcomm who are spending a lot of time and effort developing a broad range of band supports on their chipsets. There's a lot of money going into the screen quality because consumers are interacting with the screen and the integrity of the chassis, and we're seeing tremendous performance improvements in the physical integrity of the devices. But one area that's kind of lagging still is the money that gets put into supporting the front ends between the chipset and the antennas that support bands physically. And that's unfortunately an area where manufacturers will sometimes look to cut costs. And a $1.50 part that maybe should have been a $2 part, next year is going to be $1.25, right? And and the complexity in the engineering of the front ends is really, I think, the larger part of the challenge of the single SKU.
Yeah, the complexity around antenna design, when you think about it, you've got Wi-Fi radio, you've got Bluetooth radio, you've got the LTE radio, you've got normally one other or two other radios in there, 3G, CDMA, GSM. So there's a huge complexity in pulling all of these radios together so that they don't interfere, that they can work together. And then you're moving to higher orders of MIMO as well, both in the LTE radios as well as in Wi-Fi. So that adds additional complexity. So it's not just the number of bands that have to be supported, but the number of antennas to support all of those different bands is a real complex challenge.
But getting down to fewer SKUs has got to be good for you guys, for the regional and rural, competitive carriers, right?
I think it's good, but the complexity adds cost. And
to your network?
No, well, if you look at it from a network perspective, I think the flexibility is great. And certainly from a roaming carrier, fantastic to have all those bands supported in one device. I think the issue becomes, though, the phone is not going to work on all those bands all the time. Sometimes, the carriers will determine what bands are supported. But, from a consumer perspective, being able to take that device from one carrier to another is certainly positive for them. But the cost of that device, as a rural retailer, there's just not a lot of people out there that are interested in a $600 device.
Seems like a lot of people are interested in the iPhone, even in rural America.
They are, but it has to be subsidized pretty heavily. The uptake, at least in the markets that we serve, is not that great on those high-end devices.
Okay.
I mean, their appetite is much greater for the very, very low-cost smartphones.
Okay.
And once we get to CDMA and the older technologies, that'll also help too in the devices and the complexity of them. We'll still use the same bands, but it'll be different.
But by the time we have single mode LTE, 5G will be around. So.
Oh, great. That's great to hear. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for participating in the panel. This was a great discussion. We're at the end of our time here. So let's give the panel.
Thank you, Maggie. Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, panelists. And thank you for the learnings. I really like the way you tied in the strategic vision that Chetan shared with us with the actual, where the rubber meets the road solutions. And so thank you so very much. Appreciate it. Okay, we're sort of getting to the end of our event here. It doesn't seem that long, but we're very nearing the end of the CCA's annual convention. And again, I'd like to thank our Pinnacle sponsors. And those of you who are watching on the live webcast, I hope you take time to visit at least the websites of our Pinnacle sponsors: Alcatel-Lucent, Brightstar, Ericsson, Huawei, Interop Technologies, Sprint, and T-Mobile, and TNS. They've all made this possible with their kind and generous support for our Competitive Carriers Association. Now, before we head out, remember we have some cash prizes to give away, and I've got a few dollars here in my pocket here that Lucy said I can give away. So while we're doing this, please take your evaluations forms and start filling those out, because when you hand those back to staff in the back, Lucy's back there, you take the evaluation forms there and you'll get a ticket, and we're going to have a drawing for the $1,000 giveaway. But before we do that, let me give you just a little update on the future here for the CCA's upcoming calendar. We'll hold our newly rebranded 2016 Mobile Carriers Show April 13th through 15th in Nashville, Tennessee. The events committee has already started planning the sessions for this event and recruiting speakers in the various sessions. Love to have your comments and recommendations there. The Mobile Carrier Show is more technical in nature, but we have a full exhibit hall, plus Nashville has a great town and of new activities to offer, so I hope you'll come and join the new venue there. So mark your calendar, April 13th through 15th for the Mobile Carrier Show. And as always, I encourage you to get involved at the CCA. Join one of our committees. Come to our events. Join the Washington Reps group. Learn what's going on in the wireless world for the competitive carrier. Now it's time for us to give away the first three prizes. Will be the apps users. And we just had not more than 10 minutes ago, we had a shift in the winner of the apps users. We were feverishly hitting the numbers there. So let me start with third place. Let me get this out here, because we have so many. Third place winner for the apps will be $50 cash, or American Express cash. Ken Mobes. Kim Mobes. Is Ken here? Okay, I figured he was here because he was still using the app. You don't have to be present to win this, so this goes to Kim. If Ken is around, please come on in. And then let me get to the second place. The second place winning $75 is Chanel Hudson. Chanel Hudson. If she's, hi, how are you? Come on. I think I remember naming you last night too. I think you won some. Man, she is a lucky lady. Come on up here. Yeah, come up here. We'll see if we can get a picture. Here, we'll get it here in front. Here's, as usual, cash fits all size pockets. Thank you. Okay, thank you so very much. Thanks for coming. And the first place winner, winning the $100 prize. Let's see if I have. Oh yes, the $100 prize. We have Naloni McGadden. Naloni. Is Naloni out here? She has to be, because the numbers were churning all morning. So yeah, here she is. Lonnie, come on down. We'll get a quick picture of you. So while we're doing this, I think we're getting very close to the time that we're going to do the drawing. So please, if you haven't submitted your evaluations, please do so. Lucy's right back here. Amanda, they'll take your evaluations. We'll get the numbers up here in just a minute. Here, come over here. We'll get a picture. Yeah. All right. Oh, thanks. Good job. Well, your thumb's broken now? Okay. Fast on it. Okay, are we ready? Okay, now, the drum roll over here. And the first winner is, okay, you just pull one out.
Yep, read the number.
Okay, the first winner is Steve Berry. No, I'm sorry. Number 161699. 161699. Do we have a winner? All right. Come on up. Yeah. Hey, Tommy. Come up here. I haven't seen you smile so right here. Now, she always smiles. Here's your ticket, right? Okay. I'm sorry.
You gotta give her a prize.
What? Oh, hold it here. Okay. Let's see here. What we have here. Hold your hand out. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Hey, thanks.
If you know Tommy, she's smiling all the time. She's such a great person. So now we have another one here. This is fun. I like giving away money. Yeah. All right. Here we have it. Oh, another one. 161 700 700. 161 700. We got a winner. 161 700. Do we have it? Huh? We got a winner? Okay, let's check it. Come on up. Oh, he wants money too. Oh, okay. All right. Here, let's keep these out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another bin. All right. Thank you very much. We're just about finished. So in closing, I've got to thank our events committee. Thank you very much for helping put this together. Our sponsors, our exhibitors, the CCA staff. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Wonderful job. But most importantly, we thank you. We thank those that have watched us on the live webcast. I think we've had a huge success. I know I've had a good time, and I hope you will join us again in the spring for national. Remember, we're in D.C. We're there to serve you, so you come by that crazy city, drop by and see us. Thank you, one and all. Have safe travels.